The greatest confusion you can offer someone who hurt you is peace. Not the kind of peace that pretends. Not the peace that hides your pain behind forced smiles, but the peace that comes from being so deeply rooted in who you are that no external storm can shake you. When a man expects tears and anger, but receives stillness and clarity, it unsettles him, because it forces him to confront a version of you that is no longer seeking to be understood by him, but is instead deeply understood by herself. This is not about playing games. It is about ending the game entirely. When a man hurts you, be it through betrayal, indifference, or harsh words, there is often an initial, almost involuntary reaction to strike back. Not always physically, but emotionally. The impulse to lash out, to confront, to explain your worth to someone who just overlooked it, is deeply human. And yet, in that very moment, when your heart is trembling and your mind is crowded with whys and how dare he's, you stand at a spiritual crossroads. You can either pour more energy into the wound, or you can return to your center. Returning to your center is not weakness. It is not suppression. It is wisdom. It is power cloaked in silence. Neuroscience tells us that when we experience emotional pain, the same regions of the brain are activated as when we endure physical pain. This is not metaphor. It is measurable. The anterior cingulate cortex and the insula light up. Your body does not distinguish much between a broken bone and a broken heart. And just like with physical injury, the first priority is to stop the bleeding. That requires stillness, not reaction. Stillness. Imagine a woman named Lena. After 3 years of building a life with a man she trusted, he told her one evening, without remorse, that he had been seeing someone else for months. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things or plead for answers. She looked at him calmly and asked only one question. Why did you wait until now to tell me? His face contorted with confusion. He expected drama. He expected pain he could use as evidence of her instability or neediness. But instead, Lena gave him a mirror, a reflection of his own behavior in its full clarity. Then, she walked away. Her calm was not indifference. It was discipline. It was emotional mastery. And most importantly, it was deeply confusing to him. When you do not react the way someone expects you to, especially when they hurt you, you disrupt the internal script they are running. Human relationships are filled with conditioned responses. If I push, you pull. If I yell, you cry. If I hurt you, you either chase me or punish me. But what happens when you do none of the above? What happens when your response is no response, only presence? You return to your center, and from there, you create a powerful energetic shift. This is what Eastern wisdom calls the stillness response. It is the opposite of the fight or flight instinct. It is neither running nor retaliating. It is pausing, breathing, observing, not as a passive victim, but as a conscious being reclaiming their power. The practice of meditation teaches this. The space between stimulus and response, that is where your freedom lies. In a relationship, the moment you are hurt, your nervous system begins to contract. Your breathing shortens. Your heartbeat increases. You prepare for battle. But here's the subtle truth. The battle has already been lost the moment you abandon your internal equilibrium. Not because you should suppress your emotions, but because you must process them wisely. An emotionally mature woman is not one who never feels pain. She is one who does not allow that pain to dictate her actions. She allows herself to feel, but she does not collapse into feeling. She observes, she contains, and through containment she transmutes. This is what confuses a man who hurts you. Not because you've outplayed him, but because you've outgrown the dynamic that he is operating within. He may still be playing with tools of control, of guilt, of detachment, but you have become fluent in a different language, a language of peace. And peace, when embodied fully, is terrifying to those who thrive on chaos. From a psychological perspective, emotional neutrality can act as a pattern interrupt. When someone does something to provoke you and you do not react, it creates cognitive dissonance. They cannot place you. They cannot predict you. This unpredictability draws attention. It invites self-reflection. Sometimes, it even invites remorse. But let us be clear, your stillness is not to manipulate. It is not to make him come back or to teach him a lesson. It is for your own preservation. It is for your dignity. It is for the sanctity of your nervous system, your breath, your being. There is a story from Zen tradition of a woman whose husband left her without a word. No explanation, no closure. For weeks, she sat in silence, not out of despair, but to listen, to herself, to the echoes of her expectations, to the lessons she had ignored. When he returned, apologetic, bewildered by her lack of outrage, she greeted him not with anger, but with a calm, simple question. Are you still looking for something I cannot give you? He wept, because he did not expect to be seen so clearly. Clarity is rare, it is magnetic, and it is most often birthed in the space where reaction used to live. So when a man hurts you, do not race to fill the silence. Do not rush to define what he has already disrespected. Instead, observe. Let him feel the full weight of your absence from the emotional game. Let your energy speak where your words once begged for understanding. This brings us to the second teaching, to mirror energy, not emotion. This may seem subtle, but the distinction is profound. When someone hurts you, it is easy to absorb their emotion. If they are cold, you become anxious. If they are dismissive, you become reactive. If they are angry, you feel fear or indignation. And unknowingly, you allow their inner world to override yours. But this is the opposite of self-mastery. To mirror energy means you reflect the essence of what is happening without becoming it. Picture a calm lake. When the wind rushes over it, the surface ripples, but the depths remain still. The lake does not become the wind. It only shows its presence. When a man brings disturbance, you do not become the disturbance. You reflect it with awareness, but you remain rooted. A woman named Yara experienced this deeply. Her partner would often speak to her in ways that belittled her. Subtle jabs masked as jokes, eye rolls during conversations, withdrawal during emotional vulnerability. For years, she tried to explain how it made her feel. She cried, she pleaded. Nothing changed. Then one day, after a meditation retreat, Yara shifted. The next time he made a dismissive comment, she paused. She looked at him, not with pain, not with anger, but with clarity. I see how you talk to me, she said softly, and I see how I've accepted it. That's ending today. He was confused. There was no drama, no escalation, just reflection. He laughed awkwardly, tried to dismiss it, but something had changed. She no longer absorbed his patterns. She mirrored them, and in doing so, made them visible. When you mirror energy instead of absorbing emotion, you become the observer. And the observer has power. You shift from being a participant in dysfunction to being the witness of it. This, in psychological terms, creates emotional boundaries. It allows you to be in connection without enmeshment. And when someone cannot enmesh with you emotionally, when they cannot pull you into their inner chaos, they must face themselves. This is the true confusion, because most people are not used to being mirrored without judgment or fear. They are used to their emotional behaviors being absorbed, retaliated against, or ignored. When instead, their energy is gently reflected back to them with presence, it becomes undeniable. Eastern philosophies teach that true awareness does not seek to change others, but simply illuminates. Like a lantern held up in a dark room, your awareness reveals what has always been there. And this is where transformation begins. Not through force, but through light. In neuroscience, this is mirrored in the concept of co-regulation. When one nervous system remains calm in the presence of another dysregulated system, it invites a shift. Your breath, your tone, your posture, they become cues of safety, not just for the other person, but for yourself. So when a man hurts you, and you mirror his energy instead of matching his emotion, you give yourself permission to stay in your truth. You reflect reality without collapsing into it. You create a space where he must face what he has projected, because you are no longer absorbing it. This practice does not mean you become emotionally distant or numb. It means you become emotionally sovereign. Your emotions are yours to feel, to process, to honor, but they are not up for auction to someone else's treatment of you. Remember this: a woman grounded in her own energy, who reflects rather than reacts, becomes a mystery to those who rely on control. She becomes unreadable, not because she is hiding, but because she is no longer predictable. And that unpredictability, it's not a strategy, it's a symptom of self-respect. When you no longer dance to the rhythm of someone else's dysfunction, they must either learn to rise or lose access to your energy altogether. And this is where the confusion deepens. Because the man who hurt you may not know how to respond to someone who will not argue, will not cry on command, will not demand closure from someone incapable of giving it. He may try to provoke. He may retreat. He may chase. None of this matters. What matters is that you are now living from your center. You are mirroring, not merging. You are observing, not over-explaining. You are choosing your energy over his reaction. And that choice is where your true power lies. There is a quiet strength that belongs only to those who learn to master their internal state before they respond to the external world. When a man hurts you, the most instinctive reaction is to respond outward, through confrontation, accusation, pleading, or retreat. But the truly transformative path lies in the direction most rarely taken inward. This is not about withdrawing from life or relationships. It is about returning to the root before choosing your next step. Because when you move from your root, from your grounded self-awareness, your actions are no longer reactions. They become declarations of who you are. To understand this, we must begin with a fundamental truth: clarity is cultivated, not gifted. And emotional clarity, especially in intimate relationships, demands a deliberate pause. It is easy to think you see the situation clearly when you are emotionally flooded. But the brain in survival mode is not designed to discern long-term truth. It is designed to detect threat. And so when you are hurt, your mind is not asking, what is best for me long-term? It is screaming, what can I do to not feel this pain right now? That is not clarity. That is panic. In Eastern philosophy, the image of the still pond is often used to describe the mind. When the surface is agitated, we cannot see the bottom. But when we allow the water to settle, the clarity of what lies beneath becomes visible. In relationships, this settling process is crucial, especially when someone's actions have wounded you, especially when a man's words or behavior have torn at your self-worth. If you move too quickly from the wound, you risk making decisions that prolong the pain. But if you choose to pause, to sit with what you feel, to observe the full arc of the emotion without needing to fix it instantly, then clarity arises not from thought, but from presence. There is a woman named Mariah who discovered this. After ending a toxic relationship, her instinct was to send one final message, an essay to explain how deeply she was hurt, how much she had tried, how unfairly she had been treated. She wrote it all out, but before sending it, she sat in meditation. She didn't even intend to. She just needed to breathe. What started as 10 minutes turned into an hour of silent reflection. And by the end, she looked at the message not with anger, but with compassion for herself. She deleted it, not because she didn't have the right to speak, but because she realized she no longer needed to. The man already knew what he had done. And more importantly, she now knew who she was. That is the kind of clarity that confuses people, because it is not performative. It is not desperate. It is the calm clarity of someone who no longer seeks permission to stand in their truth. From the perspective of neuroscience, this pause allows the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain, to deactivate while the prefrontal cortex re-engages. This is the seat of rational thinking, long-term planning, and emotional regulation, but it only functions fully when we are calm. So when a man hurts you and you pause, not to suppress, but to process, you activate your highest capacity to respond, not from fear, not from ego, but from wisdom. Wisdom that sees through the drama and reaches into the essence of what matters, who you are becoming through this experience. This pause creates space. And in that space, healing enters. It is important to note that clarity does not always mean closure. Many people conflate the two. But closure is often dependent on another person's cooperation. Clarity, on the other hand, is entirely your responsibility. It is a solo act of liberation. You may never receive the apology you deserve. You may never hear the truth of why he did what he did. But if you pause long enough, you will hear something far more important. The voice within that says, I can release this, even if I never understand it. And that release confuses people who expect you to remain tethered to the pain they caused. Because when you let go without demand, you demonstrate a kind of independence they cannot control. They expect you to need something from them. But you have already found it within yourself. That brings us into the next vital principle, one that may seem paradoxical at first: the power of non-attachment to outcomes. In relationships, many of us are taught to love with expectation. If I love you, I expect loyalty. If I give to you, I expect gratitude. If I stay, I expect change. These seem reasonable, But the deeper spiritual truth is that attachment to outcome is the root of suffering. This does not mean you become indifferent. It means you release your identity from being tied to the result. When a man hurts you, the pain is often amplified by what you expected from him. You expected kindness, you expected growth, you expected partnership. And when those expectations are shattered, it is not just your heart that breaks, but the vision you built around that person. But non-attachment teaches us to love fully while holding loosely. You can care deeply, but not cling. You can give wholly, but not demand repayment. You can grieve, but not define yourself by the loss. There is a story in Buddhist tradition of a monk who fell in love with a woman in the village near his temple. They would speak often during her visits to bring food. Over time, their bond deepened, but one day, she stopped coming. Rumors spread that she had married another man. The monk, heartbroken, sat in meditation for days. His master approached and asked, "Why do you suffer?" The monk replied, "Because I loved her." The master nodded and said, "Then love her still. But do not suffer because your love had a different ending than you imagined." This teaching does not diminish the pain, but it liberates you from confusing the ending with failure. Just because something did not go the way you hoped does not mean it was meaningless. And it certainly does not mean you must carry the burden of that disappointment as a permanent identity. Non-attachment allows you to let people go, not out of bitterness, but because you value peace over possession. When you no longer attach your worth to whether someone stays or apologizes or sees your value, you reclaim an essential part of yourself. You become free. This freedom, again, is deeply confusing to those who depend on your attachment to control you. When you no longer need closure, when you no longer react from a place of needing to fix or restore what has already been broken beyond your values, then you become unpredictable, and unpredictable people cannot be manipulated. This is why a calm, unattached woman unnerves the man who tried to destabilize her. He sees that his words no longer have power. His absence no longer triggers panic. His presence no longer evokes longing. And it is not because you stopped caring. It is because you have outgrown the emotional dependency that once made his validation feel essential. This kind of detachment is not coldness. It is spiritual maturity. It is what the Bhagavad Gita refers to as acting without attachment to the fruits of action. You love because it is your nature. You forgive because it sets you free. You walk away because staying would compromise your integrity. You do all of this without bargaining for a specific outcome. And in doing so, you confuse the very paradigm that hurt you. Because the cycle of toxic dynamics depends on attachment. When you remove that attachment, the cycle cannot continue. It loses its grip. It begins to dissolve. A woman named Dahlia shared her story of breaking this cycle. After enduring years of emotional neglect, she decided to end her marriage. But instead of screaming or blaming, she sat with her husband and said with quiet resolve, "I will not teach you how to love me anymore. If you haven't chosen to learn by now, it is no longer my role." He was stunned. He had expected her to cry, to plead, to list his failures. Instead, she spoke with the dignity of someone who had released the outcome. She wasn't trying to fix him. She was freeing herself, and that freedom became the silence that echoed in his life long after she left. Non-attachment also teaches us something else, something radical, that we are not entitled to people's evolution. Even when we love them, even when we invest in them, people are on their own path, and they may not rise to meet us, even if we see their potential. It is not our job to drag them upward. Attachment says, "If I love you enough, you'll change." Non-attachment says, "I love you enough to let you be who you are, even if that means we cannot walk together." This is not giving up. This is growing up. And when you live this way, with inner clarity and outer non-attachment, you enter a new field of emotional power. You no longer rely on the actions of another person to determine your next move. You choose based on alignment, not reaction. Based on self-respect, not desperation. Based on the quiet knowing that you are whole, even if they do not return. And that knowing is the most powerful confusion you can offer someone who tried to diminish your worth. Because in a world where many people measure their value by who chooses them, you have chosen yourself. Not because you gave up on love, but because you finally remembered that the first and most sacred love is the one you give to your own becoming. There is a distinct power that arises when you no longer chase explanation, but instead embody elevation. It is not the loud exit that leaves an impression. It is the silent shift. A shift not in words, but in your energy. And this, perhaps more than anything else, is what confounds a man who once hurt you, because he may expect confrontation, drama, or sorrow. But what he does not expect is for your presence to evolve so deeply that he no longer recognizes how to reach you. He stands before you, but the version of you he once knew is gone. In her place is someone unbothered, unshakable, and energetically unavailable to the same dynamic. When you become energetically unavailable to the cycle that once kept you stuck, you change the entire emotional landscape of the relationship. And this is not achieved through intellectual effort alone. It is a bodily shift, a reconfiguration of your nervous system, a choice to stop leaking your energy where it is not honored. In this sense, the most powerful message you can send to someone who has caused you pain is one without words at all. It is your peace, your joy, your refusal to carry what was never yours to hold. The ancient Taoists taught that energy follows intention. Whatever you give attention to grows. So when a man hurts you, and you continue to focus on the hurt, rehashing it, analyzing it, rehearsing revenge or resolution, you are unintentionally feeding it. Not because you are weak, but because your system is wired for emotional closure. The body wants completion. But completion doesn't always come from the one who broke the connection. Sometimes it comes from you reclaiming your energy and no longer investing it in what will not nourish you. A woman named Elise learned this in the quietest of ways. She had been in an on-again, off-again relationship for 5 years. The man always returned, after disappearing, after disappointing, after lying. And each time he returned, she listened, she forgave, she hoped. Until one day he came back again with his usual apology. But something was different. Elise did not respond. Not with anger, not with forgiveness, not even with silence as a weapon. She simply redirected her energy elsewhere. Her attention no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her life, her breath, her direction. That shift confused him more than any words could have, because energy cannot lie. And when a woman withdraws her energy, it is felt deeply, even if nothing is spoken. This is why energy is not just a concept, it is a currency. When you are energetically available to someone, you are investing. Even if you're not speaking to them directly, your thoughts, emotions, and attention are a form of connection. And many people can feel when they still occupy emotional real estate within you. They may not be in your life physically, but if they are still living in your thoughts, they still have access to your field. The moment you reclaim that space, a boundary is created. Not just emotional, but energetic. You stop rehearsing the past. You stop anticipating their next move. You stop reacting to their triggers. And instead, you become deeply engaged with your own frequency, your peace, your creativity, your path. This is not about avoiding emotion. It is about alchemizing it. Eastern wisdom reminds us that everything is energy, including pain. Pain is simply energy that has not yet been integrated. So when you sit with your pain, not ruminating, but witnessing, it begins to transform. Like compost turning into soil, what once felt heavy and dark becomes fertile ground for something new. And from this ground, a different kind of woman emerges. One whose presence speaks of wholeness, not wounds. Physiologically, this shift also changes the way your body functions. When you are constantly emotionally engaged in a painful dynamic, your nervous system is in a perpetual state of hypervigilance. Cortisol levels rise, sleep quality diminishes. Digestion is compromised. The body, like the mind, does not distinguish between a physical threat and an emotional one. So each time you think about what he did, or what he might do next, your body believes it is under attack. It tightens. It braces. Now imagine the liberation that comes when you no longer react to that story. When your nervous system begins to feel safe again. Not because the man changed, but because you did. Because you stopped offering your energy to someone who could not hold it with reverence. You began to live in a state of calm, grounded presence. And this calmness, ironically, becomes the most powerful confusion to someone who once fed on your emotional availability. A man who is used to controlling the emotional temperature of the relationship will be disoriented when he can no longer influence it. When your happiness no longer depends on him. when your peace is no longer punctured by his behavior. He may try to provoke you to get a reaction, not because he wants you back, but because he wants to know he still matters in your world. But when you become energetically unavailable, even the bait loses its power. It is important here to make a distinction. Becoming energetically unavailable is not about punishment. It is not about superiority. It is not a strategy to win the breakup. It is a path to your own alignment, to your own return. You no longer engage because you have remembered that your energy is sacred, and that sacred energy cannot be given where there is no reciprocity. And that realization becomes the pivot point. From this point, you begin to attract experiences, not just romantic, but in all areas of life, that reflect this newfound calibration. You meet people who are emotionally safe. You encounter opportunities that mirror your self-worth. Your intuition sharpens. Your life begins to arrange itself around your energetic frequency. This does not mean there will be no grief. Letting go of someone who once held your heart is not easy. But grief, when moved through consciously, is cleansing. It detoxifies the emotional body. It clears space for something truer. And within this clearing, something surprising happens. The need for closure dissolves. You no longer care whether he regrets, or reflects, or realizes, because your attention is no longer on him. It is on your evolution. This is a kind of emotional transcendence. And it is not reserved for saints or sages. It is available to every woman who chooses presence over performance, who chooses truth over attachment. There is a phrase in traditional Chinese medicine that says, "Where the qi goes, blood flows." In other words, your vital energy determines where your life force is invested. If your qi is constantly being poured into relationships that diminish you, you will feel tired, depleted, and directionless. But if you bring your qi back to your own center, to your body, your breath, your path, then vitality returns. Life begins to flow through you again. This is why the journey of becoming energetically unavailable to toxic dynamics is not just an emotional shift. It is a spiritual awakening. You awaken to the reality that you are not a victim of someone else's behavior. You are the gatekeeper of your field. You decide what enters and what exits. You decide what is worthy of your attention. A woman named Sabina shared how this played out in her own journey. After being emotionally manipulated by her partner for 2 years, she finally reached her limit. But instead of confronting him, she confronted herself. She asked, "Why have I allowed my energy to be drained here?" The answers were not easy. They brought up childhood patterns, abandonment fears, people-pleasing habits. But she faced them all. And once she did, something shifted. She stopped responding to his texts. She stopped checking his social media. She stopped rehearsing imaginary conversations. And in place of all that noise, she began painting again. She started dancing again. Her friends began to comment that her light had returned. And the man, he began texting more than ever, trying to reconnect, confused, curious. Why wasn't she reacting? Because she had become energetically unavailable. And from that space, she found not only peace, but power. This path is available to you too. Not through force, not through revenge, but through presence. Each time you choose not to react, not to reach, not to ruminate, you reclaim a little more of your energy. And that energy, once reclaimed, becomes the foundation of your healing, your joy, your purpose. In this state, you are no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. You are simply living in alignment. And your alignment becomes your message. Your peace becomes your boundary. Your silence becomes your answer. You no longer need to tell him that you've changed. He will feel it. There comes a moment in every woman's life where she stands at a crossroads, not between him and someone else, not between staying or leaving, but between who she once was and who she is being called to become. This moment is quiet. It may follow tears. It may follow silence. It may arise after months or years of being overlooked, underestimated, or deeply hurt by someone she once gave her heart to. In this moment, there is no need to convince, prove, or explain, because she is not seeking answers from him anymore. She is beginning to ask a more powerful question. Who am I, really, when I stop letting others define me? This is the beginning of healing the internal reference point. In many relationships, especially those where emotional pain has taken root, our sense of identity subtly begins to orbit around the other person's behavior. We feel seen when they see us. We feel beautiful when they compliment us. We feel worthy when they choose us. And when they don't, we feel invisible. We question our value. We shrink. This pattern is so deeply embedded that most do not recognize how it runs their emotional world. We believe we are responding to love or loss. But in truth, we are responding to the collapse of a borrowed identity, one that depended entirely on how someone else treated us. A woman named Celine once confided that after her partner ended their relationship suddenly, she felt as if she had vanished. Her days were filled with doubt. "Who am I if he no longer wants me?" she would whisper. And while her friends reminded her of her talents, her beauty, her essence, nothing seemed to touch the hollow space that had formed inside her. It wasn't the breakup alone that hurt, it was the erosion of identity. Because for too long, her sense of self was shaped through his eyes. This is the silent suffering that many carry, and it is precisely here that the wisdom of internal alignment becomes vital. When your identity is externally defined, it is fragile. It can be shattered with a single betrayal, rejection, or withdrawal of attention. But when it is rooted in internal integrity, when it arises from values, discipline, awareness, and spiritual clarity, it becomes indestructible. Shi Heng often speaks of self-mastery not as domination, but as alignment. When you know who you are, not in theory, but in practice, you stop chasing validation like a thirsty soul in the desert. You become your own sanctuary, and this shift, this grounding in your own worth, creates a quiet but powerful confusion in those who once held emotional power over you, because you no longer look to them for your reflection. Neuroscience tells us that the human brain is wired for social mirroring. From infancy, we learn to understand ourselves through the expressions, gestures, and feedback of others. A mother's smile signals safety. A teacher's praise affirms effort. A lover's affection confirms desirability. But what happens when those mirrors become distorted? When the feedback you receive is inconsistent, manipulative, or indifferent? The answer is disorientation, a kind of spiritual vertigo, and unless we intentionally rewire our internal map, we may spend our lives trying to get clarity from people who are unclear within themselves. This is why Eastern philosophy places great emphasis on inner cultivation. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu writes, "He who knows others is wise. He who knows himself is enlightened." To know oneself is to become immune to emotional manipulation, not detached, but sovereign, whole. When a man hurts you, and you respond by anchoring into your own integrity, rather than chasing closure, you send a ripple into the emotional fabric of the relationship. You are no longer reactive, you are responsive. And this responsiveness is not cold, it is conscious. There is a story of a Zen woman named Akiko. She was known in her village for her wisdom and stillness. One day, her lover accused her of betrayal, without reason, without evidence, only out of his own fear and projections. In public, he shamed her, expecting her to defend herself, to cry, to collapse. But Akiko did none of these things. She simply bowed and walked away. Later, someone asked her, "Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you explain?" She replied, "I am not what he says I am. I am not even what I say I am. I am what I consistently embody." Her words reveal the essence of identity not as an idea, but as a lived presence. When your actions, values, and energy are in alignment, you do not need to explain your integrity. It becomes visible through the way you walk, the way you love, the way you disengage from what no longer serves your spirit. Western psychology confirms that identity formed through values leads to greater psychological resilience. When a person's self-worth is rooted in principles, rather than popularity, approval, or romantic attention, they are less reactive to rejection or criticism. This is because their inner compass guides them more strongly than the external weather. So how do we cultivate this compass, especially after being hurt? It begins with reorientation. You must turn your attention inward, not as a retreat from the world, but as a return to yourself. Start by observing the thoughts that arise when you feel unseen or rejected. What story do they tell? Whose voice do they echo? Are you carrying a childhood wound, a cultural belief, an old fear? Next, restore your rituals. This is a principle both in the Shaolin tradition and in modern trauma healing. The body remembers safety through rhythm. When life feels unstable, it is the simple daily disciplines, breathwork, journaling, mindful movement, that restore internal coherence. A woman grounded in ritual becomes difficult to manipulate because her sense of self is no longer reactive to chaos. A woman named Lydia shared that after a painful breakup, she created a morning practice breathwork for 10 minutes, followed by tea in silence, and then writing down one way she would honor herself that day. At first, it felt like I was just trying to stay afloat, she said. But over time, I realized, this is who I am. I am someone who honors myself daily. That's my identity now. And this identity did not emerge from a man's attention or absence. It emerged from her own attention, her own presence, her own choice to see herself again. When a man senses that you are no longer orbiting around his attention, something in him may stir. He may reach out, not always with love, sometimes with confusion. He may wonder, why does she feel different? Why can't I trigger her like before? What he feels is the absence of your dependence, the collapse of the old dynamic, and whether or not he matures through that awareness is not your burden. Your task is only to remain rooted in your new frequency. This frequency is not arrogant. It is not aloof. It is simply free. To be free is to release the compulsion to be chosen. When you stop seeking approval, you begin attracting resonance. Because your energy is no longer signaling need. It is signaling wholeness. And whole energy disrupts the dance of emotional power. There is nothing to control when you are no longer trying to control how you're perceived. Of course, there will be moments of doubt. Healing the internal reference point is not a linear path. Sometimes you may find yourself slipping back into old patterns, checking your phone, wondering what he thinks, replaying old conversations. When this happens, do not shame yourself. Simply observe, redirect your energy, come back to yourself. Meditation becomes vital here, not as escape, but as observation. In stillness, you can see which thoughts arise from fear and which arise from truth. Over time, you begin to trust the voice within more than the noise around you. This voice becomes your guide. And the more you follow it, the less dependent you are on anyone else's reflection. In Shaolin wisdom, identity is not spoken, it is transmitted. A master does not declare herself a master. Her presence speaks it. Similarly, when you have healed your inner reference point, you do not need to declare your worth. You embody it. And that embodiment is the ultimate confusion for someone who once had power over your insecurities. They no longer know how to relate to you, because you have become someone who knows how to relate to herself. This is not the end of love. It is the beginning of sacred love, the kind that is not built on dependency, but on mutual freedom. When two people who know who they are choose to share their lives, the connection becomes an offering, not a transaction. But until then, your task is to become the kind of woman who no longer loses herself in love or seeks herself in loss. You become the woman whose presence is medicine, not because it soothes others, but because it radiates wholeness. And that radiance, it confuses those who still depend on emotional instability to feel significant. It confuses men who once measured their worth by your reactions. But more importantly, it liberates you. A woman named Dara told the story of how she once waited months for a man to apologize. She journaled what she would say, practiced responses, watched his updates. One day, without warning, he did reach out. With a vague, half-hearted message. She felt the old pull, but something had changed. She read the message, placed the phone down, and went to water her plants. She smiled, not because she no longer cared, but because she no longer needed him to care for her to feel herself. That is the moment when the internal reference point is healed. When your peace no longer depends on anyone else waking up. When your joy is no longer delayed by someone else's confusion. In this space, you are not just healing, you are remembering. You are remembering who you were before the world told you that you needed to be chosen to matter. You are remembering the girl who danced before she was praised, who spoke before she was approved, who dreamed before she was disappointed. That girl never disappeared. She simply got quiet while you searched for reflections in broken mirrors. Now she is rising again, and her rise is not loud, but it is clear. You no longer chase mirrors. You become one, not for others to validate themselves in, but for you to finally see yourself as you truly are. When a man hurts you, it is easy to fall into the illusion that your healing depends on his remorse, his return, or his recognition of what he did. But the deepest truth is this: no one holds the key to your peace but you. No one possesses your power unless you hand it over. And no one can define your worth unless you forget where it truly comes from. This speech has not been about how to confuse a man with revenge or silence. It is about how to confuse him with your evolution, your quiet discipline, your refusal to crumble, your decision to rise not with bitterness, but with wisdom. Because when you stop engaging in the old dance, when you stop reacting from pain and start responding from presence, you do something rare. You change the rhythm of the relationship. And often, you change yourself so completely that you no longer recognize the version of you that once waited, wept, or pleaded. Confusion is not the goal. Clarity is. But clarity itself is confusing to those who thrive in chaos. Your calmness will unsettle someone who expected your breakdown. Your self-respect will interrupt his control. Your peace will puzzle his ego, not because you intended to manipulate, but because you transcended the level where manipulation operates. This is the way of self-mastery. This is the quiet strength of the woman who no longer fights to be chosen, because she has chosen herself, over and over, in moments of stillness, in moments of pain, in moments where she could have reacted, but instead, she remembered who she is. Our teaching teaches that awareness is the path to liberation. And now you are aware that love without dignity is not love, that presence without inner peace is not strength, and that a man who hurts you may never understand your silence. But that is not your burden to carry. You have learned that emotional discipline is not suppression, it is sacred restraint, that walking away is not weakness, it is alignment, and that the most powerful way to reclaim yourself is not by proving him wrong, but by becoming so right within that his opinions no longer echo inside you. So let your stillness speak louder than your words. Let your boundaries teach more than your explanations. Let your energy carry the message your lips no longer need to deliver. And as you walk forward, not waiting, not wishing, not wondering, may you remember this one truth: you are not here to convince anyone of your worth. You are here to embody it. And when you do, the world shifts, not because they changed, but because you did.